go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone that is attending tonight's Virtual Lyme Impact session. This will be the last session of 2022. As most everybody knows, we pivoted in April of 2020 when COVID started. Most of our support groups were not able to do monthly in-person meetings, so we went to a monthly Virtual Lyme Impact session, and it's really been phenomenal. It's helped us to grow our footprint. It has really broadened our scope of individuals and groups that we partner with. But this will be our last one for 2022. We'll take off in December for year end. Going into 2023, we are going to go to a quarterly Virtual Lyme Impact session. A lot of our local regions are going back to in-person monthly meetings. For myself, I know that Harrisburg Lyme will be going back to monthly meetings, hopefully starting in January. Before I get too far into some introductions and some housekeeping, we have with us tonight Dr. Bill Rawls out of Raleigh, North Carolina. I'll give a little bit of an introduction to him towards the end. He's our guest speaker, pretty phenomenal information. And the individual that's facilitating all of this for PA Lyme is Bill Moore. Bill Moore's on the board of PA Lyme. He runs the Pittsburgh Lyme Support Group. And really, this would not be possible without his input and involvement. So that's really the three players for this evening. Couple of quick updates. If you're on our email distribution, if you're on our Facebook, you know you received a lot of communication about the Lily Bennett Miniature Golf fundraiser awareness events. We wrapped them up in October, early October, we wrapped them up. As you know, we held 4 miniature golf fundraisers, 2 in the Philadelphia area, 1 in the Pittsburgh area, 1 in the Harrisburg area. We had close to 300 golfers. We really hit our goal in terms of raising funds, sponsors, and donors. We were actually very, very pleased with how it went this year. Lily Bennett, as most of you know, was a 4-year-old girl in the Camp Hill, Pennsylvania area, 2014, bit by a tick, immediately came down with tick-borne symptoms, Bell's palsy, fatigue, headache, tired, aches and pains, and unfortunately, within, I believe, 11 days, she passed on. She has become our North Star in terms of raising awareness, because a whole host of her doctors said her symptoms had nothing to do with the tick that was removed from her forehead the evening she came in from her backyard. Because it was such a success, we're going to tie it next year into May Lyme Awareness Month. I'm happy to report we have 2 other regions, one definite region that's going to host an awareness fundraiser, and a second region that is looking at it and probably will. So our hope is that we can use that as a permanent foothold in the month of May to get the awareness out there. As I said, we hit our goal of raising $31,000. I don't know how that resonates with you as you're listening to this. Really very meaningful. That was very, very meaningful resources to a small company like us. We 501c3, we have no paid staff, we're all volunteers, we all have Lyme, our children have Lyme, we're all doing this because we're advocates for those that need the advocacy, and we do it really for the love and just the mission work that we do it. So next year we're hoping to raise $50,000. I do want to acknowledge that Research Nutritionals was one of our corporate sponsors. A special shout out to 𝗟𝘆𝗺 Health and Wellness in Mechanicsburg. I know that they have a couple of other locations in the Lancaster County area. Also Cetera Financial Group, that between 𝗟𝘆𝗺 Health and Wellness and Cetera, they made up for almost 1/3 of the revenue. So special shout out to them. We could not have done it without them. Looking forward, there is an opportunity for every single person on this call to participate to get your doctor to an 𝗨𝗺𝗺's medical conference that PA Lyme is hosting next year, March 24th and March 25th at the 𝗟𝗆𝗺𝗁 Hotel. This is going to be very, very important. They're hosting a fundamentals course on vector-borne infections, the fundamentals. It is a full-day conference. It is a full-day course. I know previous ones that they have done have qualified for 7 to 8 CMEs, continuing medical education credits for doctors. It's for doctors, nurses, medical professionals, pharmacists, chiropractors, naturopaths, DOs, medical doctors. It is a fundamentals course. It is not advanced. It is designed for us as patients and advocates to find our local doctors in our areas and invite them. What 𝗨𝗺𝗺's was able to do was generate a $200 discount for anyone that has never taken the fundamentals course in the past. So if it's a new time attendee, there's a $200 reduction. There's an early bird discount of another $250 reduction. So the price is anywhere from $400 to $600, give or take, which is really pretty attractive for 7 continuing education credits, 8 continuing education credits. This will be our 5th medical conference in collaboration with 𝗨𝗺𝗺's. 𝗨𝗺𝗺's has made the statement that working with PA Lyme really accelerates their efforts because we, as a grassroots organization, really have such a strong relationship with the community, with the Lyme patients in our regions and medical doctors, that a lot of the heavy lifting of getting attendance is borne by us because we're out there working the grassroots and handing out the flyers. Save the dates. Flyers will be out in about a week or 2. We'll get them out to everyone. There will be more announcements along these lines. But honestly, this is critical. You look at last year, we've had a couple of deaths in Pennsylvania of Lyme literate medical doctors. There are not enough Lyme literate medical doctors in Pennsylvania for the volume of patients looking for care. We need to increase the number of medical professionals that feel comfortable treating, and this course is designed exactly to go down that road. One of the last things associated with that, and that date again is March 24th, which is a Friday. In fact, Dr. Nancy O'Hara will be speaking Friday night. She recently wrote a book. Her presentation is going to be on PANS and PANDAS as it relates to tick-borne illness. And for those of you not familiar with PANS or PANDAS, pediatric acute onset of neuropsychiatric syndrome, a lot of the tick-borne symptoms that are associated with either Lyme or Bartonella, neuropsychiatric, cognitive, for children, it's a big problem. She recently wrote a book. She'll be our keynote speaker Friday night. Teaching the course Saturday will be a current 𝗨𝗺𝗺's president, Dr. Stephen Bach, and 3 former 𝗨𝗺𝗺's presidents. So this is kind of my way of sharing with everyone. This is an important event in the eyes of 𝗨𝗺𝗺's, and PA Lyme has kind of put our reputation at the forefront to let them know we're going to fill that room up with 100 doctors or more if we're able to do that. So be on the lookout for that information that's going to be coming out. With that, allow me to turn this over just by way of introduction of Dr. Bill Rawls. I really expected most people that are viewing this tonight would have been abundantly familiar with the work that he's done in terms of social media, in terms of virtual teaching and webinars. But oddly enough, I had a conversation with a handful of people in the last week, and they were not as familiar. So this might be a brand new experience for some of you. For those of you that maybe have seen Dr. Rawls speak in the past, this will be perhaps slightly different. So Dr. Rawls is a licensed physician. Over 30 years, he has dedicated his life to medicine. In his early 40s, his life was abruptly altered by Lyme disease. The ensuing health crisis really altered and changed the quality of his life. He definitely came face to face with the limitations of modern medicine. It's around that time he started exploring the vast possibilities of alternative treatments, and he was starting to look at how to restore health through holistic or herbal protocols and those types of therapies, which inspired him to share these revelations on the importance of cellular wellness. So in the last 10 years, he has really helped thousands of patients. He's dedicated his life. This is not just for Lyme patients. This is for those that have chronic illness, chronic inflammation. It really speaks to a vast segment of the medical population, the population, those of us that have a chronic illness. So today he works to bring health and vitality to others, where he helps them establish their own path to wellness through modern herbology. You may have heard us talking prior to this. He is a best-selling author. A previous book, Unlocking Lyme, is available, but most recently, his book that's entitled Cellular Wellness Solution, really through his graciousness, you're able to participate and purchase that book 50% off. If you go to his website, rawlsmd.com, RAWLSMD.com, you'll be able to not only sign up for a newsletter, but also purchase the book. And hopefully Dr. Rawls spends a little more time on that towards the end. So with that, Dr. Rawls, we're very privileged to have you tonight, and allow me to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Eric. Pleasure to be here, and welcome everybody. Yes, my journey in life as a physician was altered. I started a career in obstetrics and gynecology, but after doing a pretty intense night call for years, 15 to 20 years, my health crashed in my late 40s. And I first identified with fibromyalgia, later with chronic Lyme disease, when I found that I was carrying some of the microbes, but like so many of you, felt marginalized because doctors really didn't recognize what that was and didn't know how to treat it. I since found that, we were asking them things to do that they just weren't prepared to do. They didn't receive this kind of education. My journey has carried me to a different place of understanding, and I'm going to share that with you. What I'm going to tell you tonight is a little bit different story than you're hearing from anybody about Lyme disease, but the science is there to back all of this up. And my current book is not about Lyme disease. It is about the bigger picture of health, wellness, and this relationship that we have with microbes throughout our lives. So we're going to touch on some of that core way of thinking. So the presentation will take about 50 minutes, probably average, but we'll save time for plenty of questions afterwards. So I hope there's going to be some healthy discussion. So yes, I have experienced virtually any symptom that anybody is struggling with chronic Lyme disease has had. And over a 5-year period, I regained my health completely with herbal therapy primarily, not antibiotics, not other kinds of therapy, herbal therapy and lifestyle and dietary modifications. I have maintained exceptionally good health for the past decade. In fact, I got back everything that I lost and then some. So I'm a big advocate of herbs, but there's a pretty good reason for that. So you have to pick a solution that fits the problem. So we're going to talk about the problem and then talk about why herbs are really an important solution. To do that, I'm going to try to share my slides. So we're going to see what we can do here. Fingers crossed, Bill. Here we go. All right. So we're going to start the slideshow. And hopefully, Bill, you're going to tell me that everyone is seeing the first slide here in a second. So how are we doing? Bill or Eric, are y'all there?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was giving you the thumbs up, but yeah, I can see you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can't see you now. So everybody can see that first slide.
Yes.
All right. Very good. Then we are rolling. So this is a bit different look. So we're going to start with this bacteria that you all know, Borrelia burgdorferi, that corkscrew bacteria that we know as a spirochete. But currently, there are 20 different species of Borrelia worldwide that have been recognized that do cause this thing that we call Lyme disease. So it's not just this bacteria. And all of you know about co-infections and other kinds of microbes too. So when you look at Borrelia, it is one of well over 1,000 microbes that are recognized as pathogens. And I think that's probably just scratching the surface. There's an awful lot that we just don't know about. So to understand Borrelia, you have to get to the core of what microbes are and what our relationship is. So microbes are microscopic, single-celled living organisms. Typically, that includes bacteria, protozoa, but also single-cell fungi. Viruses aren't actually cells, but they're still included in as microbes because they functionally act a lot like them. And what I found is in certain environments, bacteria and viruses act the same way and are very much alike. So bacteria is about 100 to 1,000 times smaller than one of your cells. The purpose of microbes is making more microbes. Whether you're talking about bacteria, protozoa, viruses, doesn't matter. What they do is they make more microbes. To do that, they need food. So food for any living organism is another living organism, or matter, organic matter from a living organism. Everything eats something else. We eat plants, we eat animals, and bacteria basically, in a way, eat us. The microbes that we're associated with are host dependent. They have to get their food from a host. So that can come in a variety of different ways. Another characteristic that's really interesting about bacteria and other microbes is that they have an unrestricted growth pattern. That means as long as there's food in the right conditions present, they will keep growing at the expense of all life around them. They know nothing else. And that's very different than your cells. All of your cells in your body have a restricted growth pattern. So in other words, you can only fix so many cells in a heart or a liver. If one of your cells becomes unrestricted and starts growing like a bacteria, we call it cancer. And we're not going to dive into that tonight, but the connections to bacteria, that unrestricted growth and unrestricted growth associated with cancer are really fascinating. Now, we have a lot of bacteria and other microbes in our body. The largest concentration is in our gut. Why there? Because there's lots of food. All that food that we eat is food for bacteria. So they process what we don't absorb all the way down the intestinal tract with the highest concentration in the gut. But of course, we also have bacteria on our skin. And the growth of those bacteria is more limited because there's not much food. They eke out an existence off of the oils that are on our skin. But all of these bacteria, our microbiome, our gut microbiome, our skin microbiome, other places, our nasal cavities and other body openings, all of those bacteria are technically separate from us because they all eat organic matter. And so the food that oils on our skin and the food in our gut and other places isn't the only food in the body. So as a matter of fact, all of us is technically food, anything organic. The carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and other organic molecules that we're made of are potentially food for bacteria. So if that sounds like a conflict of interest, you're right on track. So we talk about pathogen as being a disease-causing microbe, right? What a pathogen is an invasive microbe that does harm by consuming our cells and connective tissue. That's very specifically what a pathogen is doing. We don't think about it in those terms, but that's what's going on. So to protect our cells and connective tissues from not only the microbes that are part of us, but also microbes from the outside, we have to maintain an elaborate defense system. Now, you hear a lot about the immune system, but we actually have 4 important levels of defense. So the first is our normal flora. So all those microbes in the gut and on the skin are potentially our enemies, because if they get through our skin or through the lining between the gut and the bloodstream, they can do us a lot of harm. So you get, you cut your skin or something like that, you worry about the microbes on your skin getting to your deeper layers. So we have pathogens in those locations. Everybody knows we have pathogens on the gut, we have pathogens on the skin. Our immune system doesn't reach out into those layers. So we depend on this relationship with our normal flora. So normal flora are microbes that we have a long-standing relationship with that work in our favor. We have a mutual relationship that they secrete substances that suppress pathogens. So this is a really important part of our defense system. So it's really, it's something that we really have to pay attention to. So if you disrupt your normal flora with chronic antibiotics, you've disrupted one of your most important defense systems in your body. The other thing is we have physical barriers. Our skin is a physical barrier, keeps moisture in, it keeps bacteria and other microbes out. And the intestinal lining, the lining of our gut, the lining of our sinuses and mucous membranes in our nasal passageways and lungs are barriers that keep microbes out of our tissues to protect our tissues and our cells from all the microbes that inhabit us. So these defenses are very important. So those physical barriers are really important. The thing is, those barriers aren't as good as we would like them to be. So there are studies showing that microbes do trickle over from our sinuses, from the skin, from the intestinal tract into our bloodstream. And so that's a trickle that they've actually identified. Now, this is emerging science that they're finding that pathogens from the gut constantly leak over. So 70% of our immune system surrounds our gut. So our immune system is that backup plan. So we have white blood cells that are stationed all along these borders throughout our body and circulating in our bloodstream to pick up these stragglers that come through. But they're also protecting us against microbes from the outside who are invading in. So microbes are trying to get inside our body to get to the food, to get to us, to get to our tissues. So technically what an infection is a foreign microbe breaking through barriers and the immune system defenses to get at the cells that make up our tissues. And you don't hear infection described in that way very often, but I think it's very important. We tend to identify an infection by how that foreign microbe invades the body. So we have respiratory infections, sinus infections, intestinal infections, skin infections, and sexually transmitted diseases that come in through the genital tract, and of course, insect bites. So microbes are trying to get in any way they can. So they've got to cross that barrier and they've got to get to the immune system. So when we look at symptoms of an acute infection, it's local damage to the barrier, but also the confrontation with the immune system. So when you get a cold or a flu, you get cough and sneezing and congestion in the lungs because there's basically a war going on of the microbes trying to cross that barrier and the immune system trying to keep them from doing that. But once they hit the bloodstream, that's the highway to all the cells in the body. So the conflict often carries over into the bloodstream, and we have symptoms of malaise and fever and fatigue as our whole body, everything in the body is infected. There are several primary factors that define how symptomatic an infection will be. So many people, 95% of the people that I talk to with chronic Lyme disease don't remember a tick bite or don't remember getting an acute infection. In fact, what I suspect is that acute Lyme disease, having severe symptoms right in the beginning, is pretty unusual. That's very uncommon. So the little girl that Eric mentioned in the beginning that died shortly after a tick bite, that is almost unheard of. And my suspicion is that she had something very different than Borrelia. It wasn't Lyme disease. She had something else that she picked up from a tick. And she probably picked it up at just the wrong time. She may have had other things going on in her body. But ticks carry hundreds of microbes. This idea that some ticks carry Lyme disease or Borrelia and some ticks don't, that's true, but every tick carries hundreds of species of microbes, and we're just beginning to figure out the potential that those microbes have for causing illness. So I expect that little girl picked up something else from that tick. How much of a load you get really is important. So most of the people that I talk to that have had acute symptoms have had a big load of microbes. They have had multiple tick bites. I talked to people that came out of the woods through the bushes and picked 100 ticks off of them over the subsequent several days, or they had a big tick that was embedded for a long time before they noticed it. So if you get a big load of microbes, that can affect symptoms. The state of cellular immune health is important. If people aren't healthy, they're more likely to be symptomatic. Multiple microbes at once, this idea of co-infections is actually very common. When I was studying SARS virus that causes COVID, there was actually research showing that many people were more symptomatic because they were picking up other viruses or other bacteria at the same time as the SARS virus. So co-infections are actually more common than you might imagine. And the last factor is virulence, the potential of the microbe to cause symptomatic illness. And that is actually more about the immune system than it is about the actual microbes. So the immune system evolved over millions of years of a repetitive exposure to an enormous variety of microbes. So all of that memory is hardwired into the immune system. So we have built-in immunity or partial immunity to many, many, many microbes. So as you know, if you get vaccinated against something, then you don't have any problem with that particular Like if you got a smallpox vaccination, smallpox isn't an issue to you. And that's because your immune system then has memory. It has knowledge of how to deal with that microbe. So when you look at the tick-borne microbes, ticks have been biting humans ever since there have been humans. So Borrelia, Bartonella, many of the microbes, Rickettsia, Anaplasma, their virulence is not as high as you might imagine. So how you can define virulence is how bad that acute infection is. And for most people, purely a Lyme disease infection, the acute infection is not severe. Many people pick up Borrelia and don't know it. So we compare that to something like Ebola virus. Ebola is rarely, humans have rarely encountered Ebola virus, so we don't have any built-in immunity. So when that thing hits the bloodstream, it ravages the body. Most of our tick-borne microbes, we end up with these chronic infections that I'm going to describe a little bit more thoroughly, but it's typically not the acute infection that makes people severely ill or kills people. So it means that you have built-in immunity against most of the microbes that you're going to encounter during your lifetime. So familiarity is a really big deal. So let's get to that infection. So we have that tick that is embedded in, and the spirochetes enter the system, and the tick gives them a little bit of a head start because the tick saliva suppresses the immune system and gets them going. So what we have here is a race. The spirochetes are trying to get to your tissues, your brain, your heart, your joints, your muscles, as fast as they can. And your immune system's job is to stop them from getting there. When they get there, what they want to do is bore into your cartilage and basically consume your cells. Your immune system wants to keep that from happening. So if this was Ebola virus coming into your system, so basically, this is a scenario that's true for every kind of infection. All microbes want the same thing, to get to the bloodstream, to get to cells and tissues of the body. Every single microbe, exactly the same thing. So if this was Ebola virus, which isn't spread by ticks, it comes in through oral passageways, there's nothing to stop it. So it gets to tissues immediately and ravages the body. But when you're talking about Borrelia, typically the immune system is on it from minute one. Again, the tick saliva gives it a little head start, but it's on it immediately. And the immune system is immediately starting to mop up those spirochetes. But it's trying to get all the way throughout your body. And very interestingly, one of the mechanisms that they've devised to outsmart the immune system is Borrelia uses something called a Trojan horse mechanism that's able to stay alive inside the white blood cell. So the white blood cell becomes a transport vehicle that carries it into the brain, across the blood-brain barrier, and throughout the body. Turns out a lot of microbes use this, including SARS virus, influenza, and a long list of others. So it's really common. So again, what these things are doing is trying to get to tissues. But quite frankly, with your average infection, if you don't get a huge load of microbes, the immune system has destroyed most of the microbes before they ever get to your tissues. But some of them make it every time. So every infection you've had, whether that is putting stuff in your mouth when you were a child that happened to be spreading Epstein-Barr virus from another child whose saliva happened to carry it, or SARS virus, or mycoplasma, or all of these different microbes through your lifetime, some of them actually make it to your cells. Some of them make it through the immune system defenses, course through the bloodstream, make it to your cells. And once they do that, they invade your cells. So all of these microbes have the capacity to be intracellular. And I think this is really important. So Borrelia is a facultative intracellular microbe, which means it can live outside cells, and it's got that spirochete that it can bore into cartilage and burn and use and consume collagen. But it can also bore into cells and become intracellular. And when it does that, it loses that cell coat and becomes an L form, which is actually very much like a virus. And it can just take over the cell and use the cell for its nutrients and resources. So this is a really interesting survival trait that virtually all microbes. So a long time ago, we didn't think there were many intracellular microbes because there are not that many that are obligate, that can only live inside cells. Mycoplasma, chlamydia that you hear about are obligate. They have to live inside cells. But it turns out Streptococcus, Salmonella, a whole lot of things can actually live inside of our cells, and they can travel with blood using red blood cells and white blood cells. A fascinating study that found that pathogens can trickle across from the gut, enter our red blood cells, and end up all kinds of places in the brain and everywhere else. Pretty fascinating. Fortunately, our cells are not defenseless. So when a microbe invades a cell, one of three things can happen. If your cells are healthy, the cell can actually expel or destroy the microbes using a process called autophagy. So autophagy is the process that the cell uses to refresh itself, to break down worn out proteins and DNA and build those things, rebuild those things. So that it's constantly using autophagy to refresh itself, but it can also use that process to expel or destroy microbes. So a healthy cell can take care of itself. If your cells are weak, from bad stress, like me staying up every other night for 15 years and not eating well and not having good health habits, if your cells are weak, then these things can actually overtake the cell, use those resources of the cell to make more bacteria, eventually destroying it, and then move on to other cells. But there's a third option, and we're finding that this is a really common option. And I think this is what happens to a lot of people. A survival mechanism that a lot of bacteria have is to become dormant inside cells, not alive, not dead, but have been capable of being reactivated. And we're finding the emergence in science is showing that this is really common, that all of us, every person on the planet, in fact, every living organism on the planet has dormant microbes inside their cells, plants and animals alike. So we all have this. We have different degrees of it depending on the things that we're exposed to. That's why you have active reactivation of Epstein-Barr virus and all of these other microbes. So as I've gotten into cases of dormant microbes being reactivated, it's pretty darn fascinating. So think about all those things that have happened during your lifetime that microbes have entered your body. Some of them might still be there. And when we talk about the co-infections that people are tested for, that's really just scratching the surface. So here's my list of all the things that can be dormant in your tissues that I was able to find. And I think this is just scratching the surface. Now, some of them are tick-borne or other insect-borne, but many of them, like mycoplasmas, chlamydias, and others, are things we pick up through life, and they can be in our tissues and they can be reactivated. But again, this is emerging science. I think we're just scratching the surface. There's an awful lot that we don't know about this. I think there are a lot of things that come from our gut and come from our skin that actually end up in our tissues that we haven't even classified yet. If you stay healthy, if you got to have really great health habits and you don't get hit with any significant stress, you might go a whole lifetime and never hear from these things. But years of poor health habits and poor dietary habits, chronic stress, poor sleep, mold exposure, all of these things can weaken our cells enough to cause reactivation. And I think that is what chronic Lyme is. So when our cells are weakened, the microbes start to emerge throughout tissues in the body, and they start shifting the environment, their internal environments, from one that favors cellular health to breaking down cells to favor microbe growth. And when that happens, the body responds by making antibodies to these the cells that contain these emerging microbes. And so we end up with all these autoimmune reactions to all of our tissues that are going on all at the same time. And this causes system-wide dysfunction that affects POTS and mast cell syndrome and everything else. It's different. Chronic Lyme disease is a little bit different in every person because we all have a different spectrum of microbes that are being reactivated, and we have different genes and different stress factors. But there are experts out there that are starting to put this model in place to explain every chronic illness, which really legitimizes chronic Lyme disease as being one of these kinds of presentations. And everything else is very similar. So when you look at it, charting a path to recovery, there aren't very many drugs or antibiotics that really match this situation. So I divide therapies up into heroic therapies. You know, we all want to go into the doctor's office, give me something, give me an injection, give me a handful of pills, and I want to be well in a week or two. It works for certain kinds of acute things. If you have acute pneumonia, then you're going to be in pretty good shape. But for these chronic infections with reactivation of these dormant microbes throughout the body and tissue breaking down and system-wide symptoms of all different varieties, heroic therapies aren't necessarily a good match. Heroic therapies are great for acute problems. Antibiotics with acute Lyme disease, that's a good choice. Antibiotics for acute pneumonia, that's a good choice. But when we move into any kind of chronic illness, these heroic therapies break down because they are not actually promoting healing. Along that pathway, though, symptomatic therapy can be valuable, especially for things like pain and sleep. But the foundation, restorative therapy, is what gets us back to where we need to be. So antibiotics, the big problem with antibiotics is I talked about normal flora being one of our most important defenses, and we slam our normal flora, right? So I talked about the study that found that we do have pathogens that constantly trickle across. So if you take antibiotics, shut down all your normal flora, allow pathogens in the gut to flourish, that same study showed that when you have dysbiosis, whether that's from dietary or taking antibiotics, that trickle of pathogens coming across that leaky gut into the bloodstream becomes a flood. So not only are you dealing with the Lyme microbes, then you're dealing with all these pathogens in the gut that are starting to infiltrate your system. So that is a real problem, is disrupting the balance of their flora and the gut. Antibiotics for long-term use also suppress mitochondria. So we're making our cells weaker. We're robbing the energy of our cells when we use antibiotics long-term. I realize some people do get well with antibiotics, but I've also talked to many, many people who didn't. I did not fare well with antibiotics. My intuition steered me away from them to other therapies. I didn't know why at that point, but it really made a difference. So in that course of things, sleep and pain are really big issues, and there's certainly drugs for that. Looking at the natural therapies, one of our biggest friends that we found to be valuable is CBD oil. It can really help with pain. It can help with sleep. It doesn't have any kind of effects of habituation. So it is something you can rely on that I think is very valuable. Medical marijuana is also valuable if you have access to that, but you have to be more careful about it because you can become habituated to it. There's also a few other things that I'll mention at the end, like low-dose naltrexone and things like that, that can help with those symptoms of sleep and pain, which are the most debilitating symptoms. But if you really want to get well, building a base of restorative therapy. And for that, herbal therapy is a solution that fits the problem. So when you look at plants, plants are dealing with a lot of these same stress factors that we are: microbes, radiation, free radicals, toxic substances, all of that. So all plants produce a complex spectrum of chemical substances called phytochemicals, plant chemicals. But it's not like just a random assortment of chemicals. These things are working in synergy to optimize the ability of the plant to survive. So there are basically two sets of chemicals. One set it forms a defense system against microbes and free radicals and toxic substances. The other is a regulatory function of regulating cellular functions within the plant. So plants actually use a lot of chemical messengers that are similar to our hormones and signaling agents in our body. So when we're taking those things, we're actually getting benefit. So these things work together in this intelligent system. So it's not like taking a random chemical from an antibiotic. So interestingly, all antibiotics come from either a plant source, a bacteria, or a fungus. But it's not the whole defense system of that organism. It's one single chemical that's been plucked out and potentiated. So they're very strong, but they don't necessarily have that intelligence behind them that you get from taking a plant. So when we look at herbs, these are things that humans have been consuming for a long time. So not all plants are the things that we can take. Some plants have toxicity. You know, nobody would make the mistake of eating poison ivy twice. But these things that we call herbs are things that humans have been exposed to for literally hundreds of thousands of years in our ancestral diets. So when we're taking herbs, especially in a full spectrum concentrated extract, we are basically boosting our own natural defense and regulatory system. So it's protecting our cells against microbes, against all those other stress factors, and helping us to maintain that internal balance that we call homeostasis. So we hear that word homeostasis. What it is when all the functions of all the cells in the body are properly synchronized. So that's what all of our hormones are doing, is synchronizing cellular functions. So when our cells are working together, that's when we feel well. So we want to keep our cells healthy. And when we keep our cells healthy, that protects them from microbes. So herbs are a really important way to do that. So these phytochemical benefits are suppressing those intercellular microbes, but they're also protecting our cells from stress, which helps clear inflammation, optimize immune functions, and that those regulatory chemicals that we're getting help balance homeostasis. So they definitely, but it's not a chemical. So when you look at an herb, you're getting a wide variety of chemical substances that affect bacteria, viruses, fungal, protozoal, in a variety of different ways. So it also enhances destruction of cells that have been infected with microbes, balances the chemical messengers called cytokines that the immune system uses. And very interestingly, this is something that I found out in the beginning, taking herbs doesn't disrupt normal flora in the gut. In fact, it makes it better. I've been taking herbs for 15 years. My gut was a wreck when I started. It actually got better and better. And I actually found a scientific study that they actually documented that herbal phytochemicals suppress pathogens in the gut and on the skin, but don't affect normal flora. I find that herbs usually work better than probiotics for balancing the gut microbiome. Really interesting. There are a lot of herbs out there that have been used for Lyme disease, but these are the ones that have been used the very most. And these are the ones that I've been using. Now, it doesn't exclude a lot of other herbs, but Japanese knotweed, andrographis, cat's claw, garlic is exceptionally good. Sarsaparilla is a nice one. Reishi, mushroom, and cordyceps, those are both immune modulators, and Chinese skullcap. So I won't go into great detail in each of these herbs. I put a lot of information in my books about these things. So just for time, so we can get on to questions, I'm not going to go into great detail, but very interestingly, where's the science? Well, there's actually a lot of science out there about herbs. You're just not hearing about it. It's being done all over the world. And that's what I've been doing for the past decade, is collecting that research. But interestingly, just a couple of years ago, Johns Hopkins, a researcher there, started looking at these things and took some of these common herbs that we use for Lyme disease and did a study. This was a test tube study. You know, they wanted to exclude the effect that the herbs might have on the immune system. They wanted to know, does this kill Borrelia? So they actually found that these herbs were superior to doxycycline and other antibiotics for killing both the motile and cyst forms of Borrelia. So they actually do. It's been scientifically proven that these have antimicrobial properties, that they actually kill the bacteria. But interestingly, some of these same researchers did Babesia, and they found that some of these same herbs, Japanese knotweed, Chinese skullcap, garlic, andrographis, they were effective against Babesia too. And then they looked at Bartonella. Some of these same herbs were effective against Bartonella too. That's a totally different kind of bacteria. And then we've also documented the antiviral properties. So it just shows this wonderful spectrum that the herbs have with this defense system, as opposed to this single chemical agent. So it really makes a lot of sense. But the herbs really have a very high safety profile. You know, we've been getting these kind of herbal phytochemicals in our ancient forage diet. Humans have been using them in herbal medicine. Toxicology studies on laboratory animals have found that the toxic dose of these herbs is extremely high, and current reports of adverse reactions are almost non-existent. So these things have a pretty good safety profile. So when you add all that up, you look at the high safety profile, the documented efficacy, and low cost compared to the other things, it's kind of like, why wouldn't you take herbs? Now, it's true, taking more than one herb is very important. So when you combine multiple herbs together, you get what we call an entourage effect. You get, you know, each of the herbs potentiates the value of the other herbs. It may be increasing absorption or potentiating some of the chemicals, but we know when we combine herbs, we get a stronger response than if we just use one herb or two herbs. You do have to take a certain concentration. So in our products in particular, we're using very high concentrated powdered herbal extracts that are much more concentrated than the tinctures that you find. So it does take a lot. So when I was doing this, I was literally taking handfuls of capsules to get the concentration that I need. And I still take about 12 capsules a day. So you really do have to get that. Of course, you have to do your part. I'm not going to go into great detail of healthy diet, but healthy diet, cleaning your environment up, that especially is pertinent to mold or another environmental toxins, stress moderation, getting sleep, staying active, all of these things are remarkably important. Each of these things is a discussion in itself, so I won't go into great detail, just to recognize that these things are super important. Other things out there, the things that has my attention the very most right now is red light therapy. Red light therapy is using red spectrum light, but also near infrared light. And this is non-damaging radiation, so it doesn't actually harm tissue. But the photons do have energy, and the photon energy penetrates into tissues. So the scientific studies have documented that they enter cells and they affect mitochondria. So they energize mitochondria without generating excessive free radicals, and it increases ATP, which is the energy source for the cell. So basically, red light therapy is energizing our cells. When you energize cells, they have more energy to repair themselves and to boot out unfriendly microbes. So cold laser therapy and more red light therapy using LED panels. There are a lot of different panels out there. You can get a small unit for about $200, a whole unit for your whole body for about $1,000. But the risk associated with it is really, really low. It is more cost effective than other things out there that are doing similar things like Rife machines, pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, and other kinds of things. I think it's doing very similar to the same things, but it's just doing it more cost effectively. And then acupuncture, stem cell injections for bad joints. Low dose naltrexone is really good for pain. There is a place for ozone and hyperbaric oxygen, but it's pretty limited. I can't consider it more of an expensive heroic therapy. If you're interested in different kinds of therapies, and I have rated all the therapies that I'm aware of on our website, rawlsnd.com. The person that manages that website and I have been rating various different therapies for Lyme disease for several years. So you can find that kind of information on the website. So I will leave you with this. My staff, they offered a 20% discount for anybody buying any of our Vital Plan products. The Restore Kit is the program that I created about 7 years ago. We've actually had about 12,000 people go through it with excellent response. So write down that coupon code if you're interested in those products. There's a lot of information at Vital Plan, but there's also a lot of information at rawlsmd.com. If you're interested in the book, you can find it at vitalplan.com/book. And it's this has all the research that I'm talking about, and it's well documented. There's 75 pages of scientific studies documenting the things that I say in the book. So I think that about winds up the presentation. So I'm going to try to stop sharing my slides and come back and join everyone for questions and answers. So very good. All right. So I think we're back. Very good. So am I still sharing my screen?
You are. If you could unshare.
All right.
That would
There
be
we go.
helpful.
How about there? All right. Excellent.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rawls. So if anybody has questions they would like to ask, just use the either use the chat or the Q&A feature in Zoom, or if you're on Facebook, just leave a comment and I will scour for those comments.
Dr. Rawls, I got a couple of questions texted to me by individuals, and the one question is, for an individual that has had Lyme tick-borne co-infections for the last 10 years, currently on a protocol of herbals, but also a rotation of antibiotics, the fear is coming off of the antibiotics. There's an interest in considering a plan like yours, but the holdback is coming off the antibiotics and then going back to, a flare-up session. I don't know if you're able to touch on that. Might be a little too specific, but do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, it's a dance that we've helped a lot of people through, and it's it's tough because you get caught in the situation where you are suppressing those activated microbes throughout tissues in your body with the antibiotics, but you're also weakening your cells, killing your normal flora, and weakening your immune system at the same time. So you get stuck in this situation that you're not getting all the way better, but the therapy eventually catches up with you and just makes you worse and worse. So the answer is getting on a really good herbal protocol and staying on it. Sometimes that can take pretty significant concentrations of herbs, and then just very, very gradually tapering off the antibiotics. And we've had plenty of people do that. It's different for everybody. Some people can taper off in a week or two. Some people, it takes several months, but you can do it.
Thank you.
All right, we have a couple of questions. One question is, what about oil of oregano to treat Lyme, 𝗨𝗵𝗿liche and Bartonella? Does it help?
Yeah, so oil of oregano is an essential oil. And you can do herbal extracts of oregano, or you can do essential oils of oregano. And we hear a lot about essential oils. I actually did a variety of different essential oil protocols because I wanted to try everything. And I think it's important to respect the difference between an herb and an essential oil. So what an herb is an extraction of the chemicals that are part of the plant, that phytochemical defense system that's protecting cells in the plant and circulating within the plant itself. What you get from an essential oil is a deterrent, all right? So plants, some plants, a lot of plants, put little vacuoles or little bubbles filled with oil in the leaves and the stems. And these things are meant to be toxic. So when an insect or something comes along and starts munching away on the leaves, it releases these toxic, noxious chemicals and chases the insect away. That's what they're there for. So they're actually walled off from cells because they're a lot more toxic than the chemicals we're extracting for an herb. So essential oils can be very valuable, and there's some that are more toxic than others, but all essential oils are going to have more toxicity than your herbs do. And that means it's going to be harder to get them in you. So I did use oil of oregano on different occasions. You really have to be careful, because if you use it too frequently, it can really irritate the heck out of your gut. Because you remember, this is a deterrent, it's an irritant, it's meant to be that way. It does have anti-inflammatory properties and some really nice antimicrobial properties, but it's a lot harder on tissues than your herbs are going to be. So most people, I start and go as far as we can go with that herbal protocol. And, on a lot of people, that's all they'll need. But the essential oils are always there, and I don't necessarily start with them. So keep them in the background. If the herbs aren't working, or you just want to add some extra punch for just short periods of time, essential oils, oil of oregano, neem oil, black cumin seed oil, and some of the most toxic but the strongest antimicrobials are clove oil. Clove was actually one of the substances in on the Johns Hopkins studies. So it's a really strong antimicrobial, but it will tear your gut apart if you use it for any significant period of time. You really have to be careful.
Okay, we have a question from Facebook. The question is, are the herbs that you mentioned also applicable to tick-borne relapsing fever?
Yes, I mean, these herbs cover a lot of different things. And again, there's so many things that we don't know about. That's a real advantage of using a spectrum of herbs, that you're going to cover a lot of bases. And I always tell people, there's always that potential that there are things that haven't even been cataloged yet that could be in your system. And it's like when I wrote my book, Unlocking Lyme, we had identified 12 species of Borrelia. That's up to 20 now. Who knows how many more there actually are out there? And along with many other microbes, they found that one tick carries 237 different families of bacteria alone. And a lot of those things are infectious. And so they may be infectious in ways that we just don't even know yet. So it's, there is a lot of stuff out there.
Okay, we have a question from Zoom. What is the role of parasites?
You hear a lot about parasites, and I think they do play a role, but how significant it is, I think, is very individual. So parasites, what we're talking about, what people are typically talking about is worms. These are multicellular organisms that reproduce differently than bacteria. Bacteria, protozoa, and fungi reproduce just by dividing. We make more. They get more and more and more and more. So they can just keep dividing as long as there is food. Whereas a worm has to reproduce sexually, and that involves laying an egg, a larva stage, all the way moving around to an adult stage. And that typically doesn't happen within one host. So we all pick up larvae and eggs in food from time to time, but it's all about load. We all get some, but we get very small concentrations compared to most places. So to get them, there has to be some kind of contamination of the food, or if you're walking around in the yard in wet grass, where there have been eggs or larvae that could actually get into your skin or into your system. So you have to be inoculated with them. And they go through a life cycle, they die, they don't reproduce inside of you. They lay eggs, so we expel the larvae, but you have to take them back in to get re-inoculated. So in third world countries where an outhouse is right outside the water supply or the kitchen, and people are getting contaminated food, then that re-inoculation is occurring all the time. So my wife's a biologist. I've had this discussion with her so many times. So in third world countries, they are carrying high loads of microbes or high loads of parasites. But interestingly, I actually found a study that found that in third world countries where they do have a high exposure, much higher than we have here, people that were healthy with strong immune systems had a very, very low burden of parasites. So a healthy immune system can take care of these things. So our health of our immune system, cellular health, is so remarkably important even with that. Fortunately, all of the herbs that I mentioned have antiparasitic properties. So each one of those things are actually helping you out in that category too. So I don't think it's something that you necessarily have to do a parasite purge to get well. Using the herbal therapy, you're continually suppressing any potential parasites in your system. I think it's unlikely that most people in America have huge loads of parasites.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, what do you think of Byron White tinctures?
I used to think they were fine. I took them. They're really potent, right? Everybody says, wow, they really make you herx. And we have come to define therapies by how they make us feel, how they make us hurt. Do we feel bad? Do we take it and feel bad? I was going through the Byron White formulas and looking at the various herbs. I took them some in my recovery, but went on to other herbs. And they were effective. So they do have some good herbs there, and they're very concentrated. But something that I found in Byron White formula that surprised me, and I've actually found it in other products, several other products, is herbs that are poisonous. Yes, I have found that. One of the formulas, I think it is the Bartonella formula, there's one herb that's classified as a poison. So why in the heck would they put it in there? Well, it probably does have some antimicrobial properties, but it also makes people feel something. If you feel bad, it must be working, right? And I've been finding this over and over in products, and it disturbs me. Yeah. So be careful with what you're buying out there. Really investigate every herb and make sure that you're not getting something that's toxic, because there's so many great herbs that have extremely low toxicity. Be careful. Know what you're buying.
Good advice. Okay. Have you had success treating fibromyalgia and chronic pain resulting from chronic Lyme?
Yeah, in my opinion, what fibromyalgia is somebody that hasn't gotten a diagnosis of Borrelia yet. So are all cases of fibromyalgia related to Borrelia or specifically Lyme disease? No, but it's all basically the same thing. It's reactivation of microbes, like I discussed. So there are lots of microbes that can cause Lyme disease-like symptoms. That big list that I showed, many of them can do that. So I think it would be impossible to describe fibromyalgia without looking at that consideration. The problem is it's hard to find these dormant microbes in our tissues, and there's so many things out there. We're just starting to really understand how it all fits together and what things are. So yes, I've had plenty of people with fibromyalgia and many other autoimmune conditions and many other things respond. In fact, I would suspect that anybody with any chronic illness would probably benefit from herbs in some capacity.
Okay, the next question is about astragalus. So is it okay to use the herb astragalus if you've had Lyme disease for 7 months, or is it just appropriate in the early stages of Lyme disease?
Yeah, there's so many great herbs that we can choose from, and Stephen Booner put out some huge warnings in his books in the beginning that it could stimulate the immune system and potentially stimulate autoimmune functions. And that's the difference between the herbs that I offer and herbs that have been found to have that potential. Echinacea, you won't find in our protocols. Elderberry, you won't find in our protocols, because those things actually do stimulate the immune system. They're okay for short-term for acute viruses. I generally stay away from them for many chronic infections. I'm not sure the jury's out on astragalus, though. I tried to research all the journals to try to find some absolute evidence that astragalus caused autoimmune illness with taking it long term. I just couldn't find it. There wasn't that evidence wasn't that strong, and there was some evidence to the contrary. So I've kind of stayed away from astragalus, but it's a really nice herb. So I think it's one that it certainly we can take it periodically for short periods of time. That being said, that roundup that I presented with Japanese knotweed, andrographis, garlic, Chinese skullcap, these are herbs that have been documented in these Johns Hopkins studies. There's such a nice place to start. And none of those herbs have I found any evidence overstimulate the immune system and could aggravate autoimmune. Every case of Lyme disease, we're finding that some level of autoimmunity is part and parcel. So these herbs, I can tell you, if they're working, they're actually normalizing autoimmune functions. And most of these herbs are defined as immune modulators. So what that means is they're going to calm overactive portions of the immune system and boost underactive portions of the immune system. So immune modulators, like those herbs, like reishi, like cordyceps, I think are really important in Lyme disease. So I am a little more cautious with the ones that potentially have been labeled as being stimulating.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a different herbal protocol for yeast and fungus, or is it the same set of herbs?
Same set of herbs. I mean, that's the great thing about the herbs. Garlic especially, it's great for yeast. Japanese knotweed is great for yeast. Again, though, with the herbs, you're not affecting normal flora, all right? So one of our problems with Candida is that favorable yeast in the gut that compete with the Candida have been suppressed. So the Candida is dominant. So the herbs actually suppress Candida without affecting some of those normal flora versions of yeast that we have in our gut that we really need to survive. So the herbs are really nice for that. But you do have to watch your diet, and all of the other things have to be part and parcel of the whole thing.
Dr. Rawls, I want to make sure I answered a question correctly. A patient texted and wanted to know if you were treating and seeing patients, and I responded that you were not, which I believe is correct?
Yep.
And then the follow-up question by the individual was, the protocol really makes sense, but how the heck does someone go about doing it without someone guiding them? So that's a concern. I've heard that. I actually share that concern. How do we do that without, the guidance of a typical practitioner?
Yeah, it is an issue. For years, I've been doing consults. I don't manage medications or write prescriptions because you can't do that over state lines, and that allows me to talk to more people, and I've done that for years. Right now, I'm kind of taking a short sabbatical just because I did that for 3 years while I was writing that book, and it was pretty darn intense. So I'm taking a break now just to promote these concepts, promote the book, and get this information out there. But part of writing the Unlocking Lyme book was developing a program that we're actually working on enhancing right now. So the herbal kit, the Restore kit, is not just a bunch of herbs. Here, we're going to throw this at you, and here, take this. I recognize the importance of needing that guidance and information. So I wrote, I try to solve problems by writing. I wrote this enormous email series that actually goes on for a full year, that people get emails every several days with packets of information. So in the beginning, it's very much loaded toward, here's what you need to know about the herbs. Here's how you get started. Here's what kind of reactions to expect, all of that. We paired it. I wrote a gut program that's probably one of the best in the industry that people go through. And I wrote these things with the anticipation of what kinds of questions that people would have as they went through this course of therapy. So that goes on for a full year. But it's not just that. I've spent a lot of time training my staff, and we actually not everybody takes us up on this. I wish they did, but we have an introductory session with everybody that onboards the program, just an onboarding program that we spend an hour counseling people, and I'm there to answer questions. We do that again at 3 months just to pick up the questions that people are having along the way that might not be answered by the email course. And then we do that later. So we're gathering information, we're giving feedback, we're trying to do everything we can to help make this the most cost-effective program in the world for overcoming Lyme disease. So if you do all the things that we provide, it's going to be the equivalent of signing in for one of these clinics that costs $50,000 a month. So it's pretty good. Now you have to be proactive. You have to do the stuff. We're going to give you guidelines on diet and how to clean up your life and all these things that you have to do. But you really have, yes, it does take a person who has said, okay, I'm ready. I want to do this. I'm going to take this and I'm going to follow these protocols. But, we counsel people I realize that it can't be a one size fits all. So, the program is designed to help people individualize, to pull in other things when they need them, possibly take antibiotics when they need them, looking at other kinds of therapies like red light therapy or other kinds of things. So there's a lot built into the program besides just a bunch of herbal capsules. But the herbs themselves are some of the most concentrated products that you can get.
That's very encouraging. So it sounds like if somebody wanted to go down that road with the protocol, they could share with someone on your team a list of the supplements they're currently taking, what they're currently doing, so they'd be able to ask specific questions about how to tailor off and tailor on. Would that be correct?
When you call our number, you actually speak to a person, and that person has been trained by me. Now, they're not there to answer medical questions, but they can answer an amazing number of questions about just products and how things fit together. I've spent a lot of time with these people. We have health coaches that have all been through chronic Lyme disease that I have taught personally. So even though I can't see every person individually, we're building out a fleet of health coaches that can get through this. Because when I was writing the book, I came upon a study that this was looking at overcoming chronic illness, looking at all the things that needed to be done. And their conclusion at the end of the study was that overcoming any chronic illness is 90% self-care, which means only 10% of it is what you get from some doctor's office. A lot more of it is going to come from what you do outside a physician's office, not what people do to you, but what you do to yourself. So taking command, being proactive, that's what's going to actually get you well. And we try to put people in a position of being able to do that.
That's encouraging. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, we've got some more questions. I know you touched on this, but if you don't mind, as a way of review, someone is asking, what herbs do you recommend for Bartonella, please?
Yeah, Bartonella is one of many microbes, and there are actually a variety of species of Bartonella that can be involved. The study showed that Chinese skullcap and Japanese knotweed, which are part of our primary protocol, had good activity. Garlic and andrographis also have some activity. For people that have tested positive for Bartonella and aren't moving as fast as they would like to, one of the best herbs out there is 𝗟𝗆𝗺𝗃𝗃. And so I do have kind of a booster product that it is a tincture. It's hard to find 𝗟𝗆𝗺𝗃𝗃 as a standardized powdered extract, which is more concentrated. So we built a tincture with 𝗟𝗆𝗺𝗃𝗃 and some other things in there, more specifically to cover Bartonella for people who may not be getting everything they want to from the primary protocol.
Okay, I've got a question, and I apologize. Some of these are tongue twisters. What do you think of treating with PZA, pyrazinamide? I'm sorry if I said that wrong. And methylene blue and dapsone for chronic Lyme, Babesia, and Bartonella in connective tissue.
Those are more standard conventional products. I've had people use methylene blue and have some really good benefit from it. I have not used it in my practice, and I didn't use it personally, so it's harder for me to talk about those things. What I can tell you is your goal is restoring cellular health. And part of that is suppressing the microbes, but this is about restoring cellular health more than anything else. And those things may be suppressing microbes, which can be advantageous, but they're not doing very much to restore cellular health. So they're doing one thing. The herbs are doing everything all at once. Possibly if you wanted to add those things on with herbal therapy, that may be of benefit. But, most people, if they really embrace the herbal therapy thoroughly, they do just as well or better.
Okay, we have a question about red light therapy. Any further info or guidance about red light therapy? What to look or shop for?
Yeah, it's a little bit free for all out there. When we look at Rife and PEMF and some other things out there, some of these energy therapies, I would call them, there's not a lot of research. And what really has gotten attention with red light therapy is there's some really good research out there within the past 5 years or so, really documenting how the red spectrum light is affecting mitochondria, energizing cells. And again, we may be doing some of those things with PEMF and Rife machines. I think probably that is more how Rife is working than actually dialing in specific microbes. I mean, you look at that list of microbes that are potential, and the fact that we have 40,000 different species of microbes in our body. The idea that we could dial a frequency that hits one microbe in the body, I really have a hard time with that. Now, I've had a lot of people report benefit from Rife, but I think what we're doing is energizing cells and energizing autophagy, which is the ability of cells to destroy or expel pathogenic microbes. So I think the energy is what matters. And when you look for a cost-effective way to get that energy, and probably one of the safer ways, the red light looks really good, and it has a lot of good studies. So if you look up red light therapy on PubMed, you're going to get a series of studies that document its benefits, and that makes it really attractive. The other thing that makes it attractive is LED. So if you go back a decade or more, what you were having to use was targeted, what they call cold laser. So the focus beams of red spectrum light, and it was just at a focal point with the red laser. That was pretty good for joint pain and that sort of thing. I used it at one point, but it was pretty darn localized. So the advantage of the LED panels is you're getting this photon energy from the panels that you can administer to a pretty wide area. And it's a lot more cost effective than the lasers. So the LED have just really opened up this brand new thing. So most of them have two spectrums. They have one spectrum in the red and one spectrum in the near infrared. And so the red is just penetrating skin deep, where the near infrared is pulling down into our deeper tissues, our joints, our blood vessels, and energizing our tissues. There are a lot of companies out there. I bought one recently because I was curious. I didn't have it with my primary therapy, but I wanted to try it out. So I got a little $200 panel from Mito Red company, and it seems to be really good. I'm not really having any big issues right now, but whenever I have like a overworked muscle or something like that, I use it. But it's I think there's a lot of promise there. There's a company called Joov, Joov. That's kind of the Cadillac out there. They make exceptionally good panels, but they're very, very expensive. So I think there's some other companies out there that are making good panels, but you just have to do your homework. There are several good articles published on the internet that if you just start Googling, best red light therapies and that sort of thing, look for impartial articles that aren't selling a particular brand. And there are a number of articles out there. I think that could help you make some choices. Start with a small one. If you get benefit in one localized area, and the deal is you can get a small one, use it on your knee, and then use it on your hip, and then, use it on your brain. So it's actually being shown to have benefit for brain fog, for cognitive functions and dementia patients. So it has a wide range of uses. It looks really promising.
So Planet Fitness has a a total body red light machine. Do you know anything about that? Would that be advantageous because it would be cost effective?
For doing a total body, yeah, I think they're great as long as it's a good panel and it's got both spectrums of light. Yeah, you know that some people are doing the full panels, and what they're suggesting is doing it once or twice a day for no more than 10 minutes, and sessions no more frequently than 6 hours, any less than 6 hours apart. And so that's usually, you know, like 4 to 10 times a week. And people are reporting benefit from that.
Okay, I'm going to check Facebook one more time for questions. Doesn't seem like we have any more questions here on Zoom. Eric, do you want to say any closing remarks?
The only closing remark I would have is this is fascinating. When we spoke about a week or so ago, Dr. Rawls, you made a comment that resonated with me, that the information is really kind of going to shake up how we have viewed chronic illness, chronic Lyme, and really the past decade or longer of treatment protocols. So it is a little different. It is encouraging from my estimation. And I think some of the feedback that I'm getting from individuals is the fact that it's natural is, you know, just really very positively received. So we may have time, Bill, for just one more question, if you think.
Okay. Sure.
I could not find any more questions on Facebook, and I don't see any more here on Zoom either.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll close one out. I'm surprised nobody asked me about
Oh, I
biofilms.
apologize. I missed several questions. I apologize.
All right. Well, let me, I'm surprised nobody asked about biofilms because I didn't mention that. I don't consider chronic Lyme disease a biofilm disease. The symptomatology doesn't fit biofilms. Does Borrelia exist in biofilms in the body? Probably, but I don't think that's the major reason why it's become resistant. I think it's because it's intracellular, and so many of these microbes are dormant inside cells, and antibiotics just don't get to it. But biofilm diseases because symptoms by damaging the surface where the biofilm forms. So it can form in joints and other parts of the body. Your tooth plaque is a biofilm, but that's not typically what I think we're finding. And everybody taking all these biofilm busters, well, you do have a very important biofilm that lines your colon that's really important. And if you're taking all these biofilm busters orally, you're going to disrupt that very important biofilm that protects your gut. So I tell people, be careful. Your immune system can break down biofilms. Herbs can promote biofilm reduction. So yeah, biofilm may be part of the equation, but I don't think that's the main reason why people stay chronically ill with Lyme disease. And I can't find any research to support it. But when you look at that intracellular dormant microbe, more and more research every single day supports it, loads of it.
Okay, we do have a couple last questions. Infrared sauna, is that the same as red light therapy?
Well, interestingly, some people are putting red light therapy in their infrared saunas, and I think that's fine to do, except that you would have the red light probably on longer than you really need to. But that's a marketing thing that some of the companies are doing. But infrared sauna, far infrared sauna, basically that's just, you know, when we look at the wooden saunas that are labeled far infrared saunas, it's basically a wooden box with a heat coil in it. And what we're doing is heating the body with radiated energy, which is great because what we're doing is increasing blood flow. So one of the most important things for overcoming illness is increasing blood flow. And what that does is it washes congestion and built up toxins that have built up in the spaces around cells. So it's really important. We get that when we're healthy from exercise. But if your tissues are really inflamed, it's hard to get out and exercise. It causes too much pain. So in those early stages, before people can get out and start walking and doing things again, far infrared sauna is really important because it moves blood without causing tissue damage by friction. So I think it's a really integral part of the recovery. And if you want to buy one that has the near infrared and red light in it too, that's great too.
Okay, Bill, one last question that I see, if you see it as well.
I see it, yeah. We'll make this the last question.
Okay.
Is the red light therapy wand I use for wrinkles the same as the red light therapy that you recommend?
Yeah, what you're with the red light, with the actual seeing the color red, that's what is good for wrinkles. But it's the deeper near infrared that penetrates deeper that's better for joints and other kinds of tissues getting all the way to your brain. But this is non-damaging photon radiation. So it's actually penetrating, but it's energizing our cells, not damaging our cells. So that's why it's so valuable.
That's helpful. Dr. Rawls, thank you again very much.
Pleasure.
Again, for everyone, rawlsmd.com to be able to get the book at a discount. What a great work that you're doing. So,
well, actually, the cellular wellness solution book is at vitalplan.com/book.
thank you. vitalplan.com/book.
Right.
Very good. That's helpful. I've gotten correspondence from a handful of people that said this was exciting. They're going to look into it. I might report back to you in 6, 9, 10 months and let you know how we're doing as a group. So,
all right, sounds great.
There'll be a follow-up session into next year. So,
Sounds great.
with
Be
that,
glad to.
thank you very much for the time, Bill. Thank you
My
for
pleasure.
participating, and to everyone, have a good Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of 2022. We will see you in 2023. Thank you.
Sounds good. Everyone, take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.